meeting. We have another meeting this week. So there are many, many priorities of the Senate. I would say some of the ones that I think are critically important. We do have a Senate bill regarding absentee voting, and we have Senate bill regarding affordability of health care, which is really important, particularly since we've seen the expiration of the subsidies from the federal government. We find many, many families here in Ridgefield that have come to me that are really feeling desperate because they don't have access to affordable health care anymore. And that is a critical problem. It's going to take us some time to figure out how we as a state can replace what has been done by the federal government in the past. So now, you know, while we were on, I think, track to begin to have affordable health care, it wasn't necessarily the best program ever, but it was certainly more affordable than where we are today. Now we have to figure out how do we do that as a state, and that's something we'll be working on this year. So there are lots of bills, and I know you have lots of questions, so I'll close with that, but it's been a privilege to represent. I know all of my colleagues here share the privilege of representing our district. We work hard at it, and I think we get a lot done.
Thank you. Now, just for everyone who's not familiar with this format, the League of Women Voters has legislative priorities. If you want to see what those are, you can go to the League of Women Voters of Connecticut.org website and look under 2026 legislative priorities. From there, that's where these questions I'm going to ask are, and when we finish these questions, we'll open it up to see if people in the audience have questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for explaining what it is you do. And Senator Kushner, you've actually helped me enormously, because often my questions, it's difficult to decide who could best answer a question because you all serve on such different committees. But question number one is two-part, and I'll explain the premise to everyone. Last year was the first year that we adopted early voting. However, the funding requested by the Secretary of State for the changes to facilitate training and education did not materialize in the manner she requested, and created challenges for towns across the state. In 2024, citizens supported the referendum question on universal absentee voting. So, Senator Kushner, you talked about the bill in the Senate. What steps have you taken to move forward the legislation on universal absentee voting? And the second part really, I think, could go to somebody who's on appropriations or funding. What funding have you promoted in the budget to train our local election officials and poll workers? Thank you.
Actually, I think I'm the only one on the delegation that's on appropriations. In terms of the general the elections committee that is working on this, I don't serve on that committee, but I know we do have a priority bill that would provide that the GAE committee brings out a proposal to allow for absentee voting by all. And it is what the voters voted for in 2024. I think you'll see that it'll be comprehensive and make it clear that anyone who chooses to vote by absentee ballot can do so. In terms of the early voting, I think it's gone really well, considering we didn't have the right funding for it. I know here in Ridgefield, I think people took advantage of it. I think it went smoothly in Ridgefield. I also know that it did in New Fairfield. We had more problems in Danbury because I think of the size of the population that took advantage of early voting, particularly in 2024 when we first initiated it. It was kind of crazy, but it was, I think, effective, and a lot of people use that. I do serve on appropriations. Unfortunately, the funding for that particular office comes out of general government A, so I'm not on that subcommittee. But I will tell you, I think that most of us believe that there has to be proper funding for the training and for the making sure that we have the right voting machines. I know this year I have talked to the Secretary of State, and we are going to have voting machines that can register the vote immediately when it's inserted into the machine on early voting, which I think will make an enormous difference. We were unable in Danbury, even in the municipal election, to count the early votes before midnight, and it shouldn't happen that way. So I think those machines are going to help a lot. to make sure that people have so that the count gets done in a timely basis. But I'm a big supporter of this. I think that we've seen more people vote because of it, and that's the goal, to make sure that we have a high participation of voters in every election.
I think, and I don't wish to misspeak, because I think I've seen Wayne here, one of the registrar of voters, but I think something like over 50% of our voters voted early at the last election. Is Wayne here? Oh, I thought he was. They did a report on it, so it was very successful in Ridgefield. People really took advantage of it. I'll keep it within voting. The State Election Enforcement Commission, SEEC. Irregularities and absentee ballots in Bridgeport caused a scandal last year, and the State Election and Enforcement Commission was not ready to bring charges until June 2024 for actions that occurred in 2019. And I'm opening this to everyone. Would you support more funding for the SEEC so that they can hire more staff and accelerate their response to voting-related issues? Somebody. Yes. Okay. Well, so then explain how we get that funding, because I think having an issue that happened in 2019 that didn't go to the courts until 2024 is justice delayed.
So one of the most active participants in the press for more, in the push, if you will, for more funding for this is our own Secretary of State, Stephanie Thomas. She is a very vocal advocate for this. And she's been really, I mean, one of the most difficult aspects of her job in recent years, by her own report, has been, how do we improve all of these spaces to make early voting more accessible, absentee voting more accessible, at the same time as having to address every single one of these violations that have these instances where the law was broken. And so for her to have that kind of funding for SEEK, so that SEEK can take some of that off of her plate, is tremendous. And that is something that we all advocate for. Even when we're not on appropriations, we're being asked all the time for, certainly in the House, we're asked by leadership, where do you think that the money should be going? Because we know we have a pot of money, and we know that we have a much bigger pot of requests. So, but keeping elections fair and legal and safe is a priority for every single one of us, and that actually is across both sides of the aisle.
I'd also just like to add that we all know Connecticut, we don't have county government here like all the other states. So it is more expensive to run elections here. As our registrars know, each town has to have their own voting machines set up. The registrars have to have their own staff in order to, fulfill what voters wanted. Voters wanted early voting, whether it's 2 weeks or 10 days, as our registrars have suggested, making a change, or the absentee ballots, no excuse absentee ballot voting, which, passed, is it 2 years ago now? We're 26, oh boy. And the Senate bill is addressing that for this year. But funding is key for the Secretary of State's office. Her office has been flat funded, I think, in this current budget from last year. And we know the challenges are just increasing, whether it's internet security, just verifying all the electric. I mean, in Wilton, we were lucky because we are one district for the whole town. So we were actually able to take our 3 different polling places because of early voting and combine them to one. So everyone just votes in one location, which saved on staff and also made it easier for the registrars. In New Canaan, I believe they had a few, 3 different voting stations. So it made it more difficult for them. And, stuff like that costs money. Again, it's unique to Connecticut, the fact that we are not county-based, but then again, I feel privileged that we are here, where we can vote on time, where we can just walk into our local polling place, because we see places like Texas where they're eliminating, or, one county could be so huge you could drive an hour and a half just to go vote, which is a form of disenfranchisement. So I'm very happy where we are here, but our Secretary of State definitely needs more funding to meet the new challenges, particularly technology, AI, data privacy.
Thank you.
Just one extra thing.
Okay.
Julie had mentioned that you'll be able to scan the ballots that come in on absentee, on early voting, but with no excuse absentee voting, the goal is to be able to scan all the ballots there as well. So all the time that the registrars have had to take, and I've done that as a poll worker, where you sit and you've got a Republican and a Democrat and an overseer, and you're opening each of the letters and double checking and making sure that everything is above board. To be able to take the ballot and scan it for everything is what the goal is, and that's going to take a lot of time from the registrars.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll move on to a different area of the legislative priorities. Groups in state have promoted the CT Environmental Rights Amendment and suggested clear language to protect clean air, water, soil, and a stable climate. There are also ideas for a climate superfund to adapt infrastructure. I'm not sure if any of you have worked in these areas, but would you support this amendment to the CT Constitution?
Okay, I'm on environment.
Excellent.
So we did just vote the Superfund bill out of committee last week. There is resistance to it, for sure. The Superfund puts I don't want to say tax, but it does require certain entities to pay into the Superfund. Those who actually helped contribute to the climate disaster, so that would be oil companies, just off the top. There is a lot of resistance to it. The concept is too big, people say. Others say, well, there's no climate change. I don't see what the problem is. And then we have our coastal communities, the legislators from those coastal communities saying, our community is going to be underwater from sea rise. So we must do this. And that was a very compelling argument. When we hear that argument, that does not negate what happens to farmers when the rivers overflow, when we have continuous heat because of climate change, and we have fires in places we've never had fires before. It's my kids live on the West Coast, and so do other members of my family, and my nephew lost his entire home, everything with a 2-year-old, and has never really fully come back from that because he wasn't alone. So many houses got lost in that fire that there was no place for people to live. And we've seen that in other places aside from where he was. So my point is just, we cannot put our heads in the sand. This is a problem, whether it's the rivers or inland or on the waterways. And Connecticut is a waterway state, and we have coastline all across the state. So I voted for the Superfund, and we'll see where it goes in committee. I'm sure in the sessions, I am quite certain it's going to be a talker, as we say.
May I ask a follow-up question then? So the Superfund we're talking about, will there be any state funding in that, or is it that it will be funded primarily by people contributing to it, industries contributing to it?
It is still up in the air. This is what we call a work in progress, where we agree to move a bill out of committee as a work in progress because it's still being negotiated, but we don't want it to die.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add to that you asked about state funding? We are already paying either through as residents or as taxpayers for resiliency projects because of the damage it's done. The year and a half ago when the flooding happened on the farmlands at our local YMCA that was completely flooded with $7 million worth of damage, we're already paying for that. It's just figuring out a way, how do we pay for it more equitably?
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it, because I am not always au fait with all the different pots of money. Okay. This is a big one, and it's something that's been raised at many meetings in town and on boards in town. Everyone talks about the lack of reliable local news sources. Local papers have been taken over by larger conglomerations or completely disappeared. Are there any steps being considered to protect public access TV? And is anyone planning to bring forward proposals to rebuild and support in some way local news?
So, okay. So I'll start, but there are others who want to speak to it. So just know that the state is actually working to expand public access TV. We are absolutely in agreement that it is essential. I know that what we have seen with our online papers, and I use the word papers just because I don't know what else to say, but it's news, our online news, with Wilton Today and Good Morning Wilton, excuse me, and Weston Today. They're essential. In Westport, it's the Westport Journal. I get the vast majority of my news from these online sources. And these are small, independent, scrappy online sources. So there are other ways, just to divert for a second, there are other ways that we can help these online sources be more successful financially, which includes, this is interesting, the past couple of years we've had a bill that would allow for public notices, because everything has to be publicly noticed. Instead of going into a newspaper, which is the take up on newspapers is so much less than it used to be, allowing our online sources to be able to print or announce these public notices would give them an income stream, which is, I believe, at Hearst alone, it's close to $10 million that happens. So that is something that I've supported and advocated for, because the nature of this local public news is so incredibly important.
Yes, of course.
I was speaking with Christine from the Board of Ed when we first got in today, and we were talking about how 4 different teachers have reached out to me from within the district, elementary, middle, and high school, and said, I heard that, you know, when budget cuts are made, that the first thing to go are teachers. And I said, well, where did you hear that? And in all 4 cases, it was social media, and it wasn't a social media news outlet. It wasn't a local paper. It was not a local. It was. There was no study. There was no report. There was no direct quote. It was just rumor on social media. And I realized that, you know, in the absence of good local news sources, that's what people turn to. And that's something that, you know, it alarms all of us, because we're constantly battling misinformation. Some of it intentionally planted, some of it innocently passed on. So I actually was looking into what kinds of other bills exist to try and boost opportunities for local news, and to really support honesty in reporting as well. So I actually found there is HB 5137, which is an act establishing a refundable tax credit for news organizations that cover local communities in the state. I know we have one very frustrated member of our community who every single time they see in the Ridgefield Press social media, child stuck in tree, rescued by man in cat costume. I don't know, I just made all of that up. And he always goes in and says, Enfield, New Haven, you know, just to point out, it's under Ridgefield Press. This isn't Ridgefield local news. And he is extremely frustrated by it. And it's moderately entertaining to see how angry he gets. But that's, you know, it's important to have local access to local information. An act funding journalism fellowships for graduates of public institutions of higher education. An act concerning the reporting of advertising purchased by the state. So all of these things are meant to keep these to keep folks sharing what's really happening in real time, and to try and break through some of that disinformation. It is if we were to give you a list of the amount of queries that we receive on a weekly basis that are based in absolute zero fact, and we have to point people to in the right direction. And I'm not saying this is to relieve us of work. I'm just saying we see the scope of misinformation, and it's dramatic.
I'll just add something because we've been doing events, and the last event we did with Rudy Marconi, which was the state of the town, and we did a PSA about the Public Safety Committee, because one of the problems that committee feels that's been formed recently is getting the information out, getting voters to understand the nature of their work, to sign up for information. And the Ridgefield Press is not as comprehensive as it used to be. Shall we leave it at that?
It's not based in Ridgefield.
No, it's not based in Ridgefield. And I'll move on to unless anybody wants to add anything to that. What steps would you support, and what level of funding would you think was appropriate to expand the Shield Law to protect Connecticut women from action by other states? Because I think you have already worked on this.
We have, and I think Connecticut has taken measures that are probably some of the best in the country to make sure that people have access to abortion, whether they're living here in Connecticut or whether they're coming from other states, and to also make sure that the providers are protected. Recently, I think we all became aware that these license plate readers were being used to identify persons from out of state who were coming here for an abortion, and then they were being prosecuted and persecuted in their home states. And we're taking measures to stop that from happening. But I think that we have a reproductive rights caucus that is very active and is looking at ways that we can ensure that in Connecticut, not just Connecticut residents, but everyone has access to abortion. And these are difficult times around the country. There's, states are enacting laws that really are making it impossible. Some of the news just recently about certain well-known figures in our federal government really even object to the right of women to vote and think there should be a household vote lodged by the male in the household. And it's really appalling what's happening and the way that we're I think moving backwards in a big way. So I think Connecticut's in the forefront of this, and I'm very proud of that. And I think that's what our residents and what our voters want.
And we're all good on that. I cannot think that anybody's going to disagree with this point.
We could talk about that for a time that would take away every opportunity for any other questions.
So I'm going to go on to another thorny area. In your various roles on different committees, has there been discussion on how to protect the civil rights of all residents of Connecticut? Have members discussed data privacy for all CT residents regardless of immigration status?
I'd like to start on this, even though I know I just spoke, but because I'm from Danbury and because that's where the most ICE activity has been in my district, I think it's really important to talk about the Trust Act and the work that's being done right now to expand the Trust Act. And I think I jotted down some of the elements that I think people will want to know about. First off, we are making it clear that in Connecticut, that the Inspector General would be able to investigate any crimes by any violation of constitutional rights by any law enforcement officer, including federal officers. It also allows the AG to take action in those cases. It provides for the start of a database in the state to track ICE activities and detainments, because right now we don't even have a record of who has been detained and deported. It bans all law enforcement officers, whether you're federal or state or local, from masking. It also requires that a badge and a name tag is worn by every law enforcement officer, regardless of whether you're federal, state, or local. And in addition, it requires a judicial warrant in certain settings: hospitals, schools, homeless shelters, and churches, and courthouses. So those are some of the the courthouse was already done in special legislation that we did before session even started in the special session. But some of this is an expansion of what we did then. I think that what's been happening in our country is appalling. In Danbury, we've seen far too many people who have been detained and deported, and it's horrific. and it's terrorizing families and it's terrorizing the community. Has a huge impact on our community. We have a loss of enrollment in our public schools that is larger than we've ever seen in Danbury. We've been a community where the school population has been growing until the last 2 years, and now we've seen a decrease. This year was 533 students, and we're told by the superintendent that this is overwhelmingly multilingual learners and immigrant students. And some are self-deporting, some are just staying home. And it's a serious situation. It's one that I think we need to, maybe you haven't felt the effects in Ridgefield, but it does impact every community, including Ridgefield, when we see constitutional rights being violated.
And I've heard from restaurant owners in Ridgefield. It's affecting people who work here in Ridgefield, people who live here in Ridgefield. There are people who just didn't show up for work the next day, never to be heard from again. I will talk a little bit about the data privacy side of it. You wanted to know kind of how it hits each of our own specific committees. I'll speak just to the Transportation Committee. I had actually proposed looking at the flock cameras when we saw what was going on. That is actually falls under the General Law Committee because they're doing a much more comprehensive. So thank you, that's right, the flock cameras. So these are the cameras that read license plates to see if you're registered, to see if they have helped in tracking violent crimes. They have helped in finding stolen cars. There is a place for them. What we don't want is them tracking women who are coming to our state for health care. What we don't want is them tracking folks for the use of ICE and for immigration purposes. So that actually is in general law. There is the possibility that will, one of the processes, especially in the House, we do a lot more referrals in the House than you guys do in the Senate, is that it may be referred to my committee for our committee to also vote on it. Basically, we give it our stamp of approval, or we ask, we interrogate a bill that may not necessarily be making sense to all of us who don't have, unfortunately, the lived experience of going through the hearing process. So that to me, that's another conversation for another day. But if that does come to the Transportation Committee, we are prepared to vote on that as well. So there is almost, I can't think of a committee that isn't currently affected by the question that you posed, by the issue that is around it, because these are all human issues that we're dealing with, and that's who we're targeting.
So just a quickie on top of what Julie said about around 500 students in Danbury. What we heard from the Secretary of the State is that there are 10,000 students less in our school systems right now. And we're trying to understand what that means and where that number comes from. But there is, to Julie's point again, about people who are self-deporting, also families staying home. But that is actually terrifying to me, because what that means, aside from the terror of the families, what that means is we're not educating the generations that need 10,000 students who need to be educated so that they can grow up and be in the workforce and be productive. That we have to look at the long-term effects as well as the immediate effects of what's happening.
As a member of the AI caucus, we signed on to quite a few of the bills, particularly the Democracy and Government Accountability Bill that Julie spoke of. On the finance side, the data privacy issue that we're looking at, we just had a bill regarding short-term rentals, where it's almost the flip side. In this era where we seem to know everything, whether it's true or not, our towns actually have no way of knowing which houses are being used as short-term rentals. So we are actually trying to develop a statewide registry just for towns to be able to access and know where those short-term rentals are. There's a lot of pushback, particularly for, one gentleman in particular, I think he had about 50 units. He doesn't want anyone to know about anything about his rentals. And I asked him, and I said, well, if there's an issue and we need to get in, the town needs to contact you about a wild party or something's wrong with the house. His answer was, the police know how to get a hold of me. And unfortunately, I saw the police union or the police chief association's testimony after this gentleman, where they outlined that we actually have to spend many, many hours to look to see, to find who owns the house and to contact them. And then there's actually no real way of almost enforcing a response from that owner. So, there's two flip sides on data privacy where, we need to make sure people here are protected so they feel safe, that they don't go into hiding, that they come to school because they are here. And then on the flip side, with all this data, sometimes the state actually does not have the data it needs either.
Thank you. I still within this area, the league has asked also, is there any legislation proposed to provide state level legal remedies for constitutional rights violations by federal agents? Because I think in the past that has not been.
Yes, that is part of this expansion, and because it allows both the Inspector General can investigate any violation by a federal officer. It also allows the AG to file a lawsuit against any officer who has, including federal officers who violated the Constitution. So that is part of it, a big part of it. And I think, obviously it's in reaction to in response to what happened in Minnesota, where there was, and there's other language in here that allows local police to investigate, state police to have access to the crime scene. These are things that did not happen in Minnesota. And with this legislation, they would then, we would have those rights protected here in the state of Connecticut.
And you said it was the Trust Act?
Well, I call it the Trust Act, but you had the official name.
The Democracy and Government Accountability.
And the reason I call it as the Trust Act is because for a very long time, Connecticut has had laws on the books to protect.
A long official name. Trust Act 2.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to check with Andy about how we're going to ask if people in the audience want to ask a question. Do we have a microphone? Oh, we're going to steal one. It's working. Yes, it's working. So if people have a question that they'd like to pose, I'm going to give this to
Francis, while you're doing that, while people are lining up,
Central. Are you going to hold it, my dear?
while you're lining up, I do want to, because I am going to have to leave early, I just wanted to mention there are a couple of other really important bills that we haven't touched on. In particular, the child tax credit. You touched on the child tax credit, but education funding, and that's a huge. There are priority bills both in the House and the Senate to increase the amount of ECS funding that's going to our schools and education cost sharing formula by raising the foundation amount. It's very complicated, and I think these bills are both still works in progress, but they both have been advanced for us to, I believe this year you will see an increase in the amount of funding going to our public schools.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. So if you could just state your name for the record and then your question.
My name is Steve Jensen. I would like to direct this to Aimee. Specifically back to that idea of the flock cameras, I would like a better understanding. I believe Flock is the manufacturer of the camera. I want to understand how that is contributing to a centralized database and what kind of protections we have relative to general surveillance legislation, so that, not only the ability to protect against gathering information for these out-of-state travels for protective rights, but how do we protect just general surveillance and this idea of compiling a general database on all of our information?
It's a great question. So Flock, what the understanding is with Flock is that because they are a private company, they can sell the information to anybody that they want to. So that's what the restrictions have to happen at the state level, because at this point, that's not going to happen at the federal level. So that's where specifically Flock looking to limit who they can sell the information to and why. Excuse me. Obviously, police departments do not have to buy that information. They can access that. So if they're trying, again, to track someone who, who harmed someone in another state or another town, they're able to do that. Looking more specifically at data privacy, we do a lot of that in transportation. So I'll tell you how we're addressing that. We have, I'm sorry, excuse me. Allergy season, I promise you allergies. The cameras that hang on. I am so sorry. That's really vile. So the cameras that track highway speeders in work zones, for example, we were very, very clear about the limitations on the amount of time that data could be kept. It could only be kept also for municipal, any town that puts municipal red light cameras or speed cameras. The data could only be kept for 30 days. You had to issue the citation and delete the data within 30 days, only to be kept if there was an ongoing litigation on the civil ticket. It turns out that in some of the older statute around highway cameras, it allows DOT to keep the data for a year. So what we're doing as we're discovering that is we're going back in and we're amending old statutes. So right now, I am looking at, I have a comprehensive list of all the spaces where that's been prescribed either to be kept for a year or longer. We all agree that technology is helping law enforcement to be able to be in places where they wouldn't necessarily be, but we want to ensure that we're being extremely responsible with the data, not selling it and getting rid of it as quickly as possible. So we're looking at all the spaces where we could be doing that. I don't think we're even going to touch on all of them this session, but it's something that we're working on getting a comprehensive list for so that going forward we're able to address that.
Can I also address the LPRs, the license plate readers? We sat down, Savet and I sat down with the chief of police in Wilton. The contract does not allow for you have to have a very specific reason to access that information on the license plate readers. To Aimee's point, it goes away after 30 days. It has been very successful in abductions, being able to see a theft, robberies, that kind of thing. But there is the chief of police, the contracts that have been written with Flock is that they are not allowed to share that information because of the SHIELD law with ICE, with the government, the federal government. They have to keep that for their own use. I think all of our concern around the manufacturer, Flock, is what do they do with the information because they still hold it. So what are they doing? Not what our police chiefs are doing and not what we're doing in Connecticut, but to Aimee's point, what does Flock do with it? And that's where the legislation is focused.
And every contract is different.
Correct.
Every community has a different contract.
Well,
depending on what Flock was, it varies.
Yeah.
It does vary.
Yeah.
It's not wildly different, but it varies.
Okay, hi, my name is Nicholas Tampio. I'm a professor of political science at Fordham University. I live in Ridgefield. I appreciate you all showing up and your hard work for government. Maybe I can ask a question to Representative Constantine, although anybody can answer. We homeschool, and we're part of a homeschool community. I think it's a wonderful community. I've been at Capitol the last few weeks. I'm just so impressed by all of these wonderful homeschool families speaking their heart out and bringing their kids there. I went to the committee hearing informational session last year. There was no discussion about substantial equivalence. And then it was sort of brought in this year, and all of a sudden lots and lots of people were speaking out against it. And nobody's really made an argument that a lot of people are falling through the cracks. I mean, so you've got a concrete, lots of parents speaking out. and against this sort of like nebulous problem that nobody's really elaborated or filled in. So my question for you is who's leading the push? Like, who is the person? Is it Bob Duff? Is it Ned Lamont? Is it like, or what interest groups are interested in regulating homeschoolers? I can't figure out what the push is. And you know, lots of parents are in anguish, and I'm just trying to figure out why are they in anguish.
Listen, 4 a.m. If you look at the public hearing, was it a week and 2 days ago, 4 a.m., Sarah Egan actually talked about a lot of the children who are falling through the cracks. Like I said, all the family, listen, any of the families who showed up at the Capitol, almost all the families we know who are homeschooling are homeschooling. You know, they, for whatever reason they want, whether to tailor it for their children or meet their special needs, they're doing a fantastic job. The ones who, because we have no standards, because we have no verification for anyone who withdraws for homeschooling, we actually have no verification that the parent is actually educating their child. One of the reps had mentioned to me, one of her constituents, you know, the son went at 16 years old to get his driver's license, and he couldn't read. It's more of a verification system, I believe, to make sure that parents are educating their children. The bill may change now that it's been JF'd out of committee. I think now there's going to be a wider discussion among many reps to discuss what are the actual issues. Do we want to do all of the bill, parts of the bill? Where should we put the focus? Because no one wants to make anything onerous for the homeschool families who are actually educating their children. And I've met many, you know, here in Ridgefield and New Canaan who are educating their children, who are in these homeschooling groups. So it's really to make sure that that few percentage of families who are withdrawing their kids, whether it's due to school avoidance issues or other issues with the kids, that, you know, they kind of give up and just say, well, I don't want to deal with the school anymore. Let me withdraw for homeschool. And then there's no verification. Yeah, okay.
So we know the bill came out of committee 26-20. I'm not on the education committee, but I was listening to the public hearing because it impacts the way what we do in the children's committee. So I wanted to listen to it. That means that this is a bill that very much is a work in progress and very much is going to be discussed at multiple meetings for the next couple of weeks before it even hits the House floor, and then comes up to the Senate. What there's similarities when I mentioned that I have a DCF as STE report to DCF, so State Department of Education reporting to Department of Children and Families. When I mentioned that in a children's bill, SB 6, that is similar to something that is in the education bill, 5468. We are talking across the two committees. Maybe that's not something that needs to be in education if we're covering it in children's. And all that is in my bill, and it's sort of interesting, in the education bill, it comes from DCF has to inform the school if a child has an open case, and then the school will deny an application to keep a child out of school. Whereas so that's a interesting way of doing it, because the child, I could get into the weeds on this because I've spent a lot of time, but the child may have the family may have a 3-day open case, and then there's a denial of the child being removed, and then that case is closed and they have to reapply. So a different way of doing it, which is what we've suggested in children's, is that the SDE reports to DCF the names of children who've been removed from school. If a child has an open case, or the family has an open case, a record goes in that child's folder. However, all the other names that have been provided have to be deleted and erased. So there's no cause of action to open a case because a child is being removed from school. It is merely to have oversight on a family that we know there might be problems already, and making certain that there are people who have eyes on children, as we've seen in multiple other cases recently.
Yes, thank you. Robert Keys, Ridgefield. I have a question for Aimee regarding transportation. Two brief questions. First, I want to take you back about 5 years when the governor was trying to promote the idea of taxing out-of-state trucks that use 95, because now they're using 95 for free. I know that's dead, but I mean, is there any chance of resuscitating having these trucks pay their fair share?
If it's up to me, it sure is. The damage on our roads being done by these trucks, there are a lot of ways that we're looking at this. Number one, we're looking at improving freight rail so that we can get more trucks off of the road. So that alone will help, ideally. But yes, I mean, that is something that we have. So Connecticut operates with the STF, the Special Transportation Fund, which is basically the bag of money is getting smaller and smaller every year. And a lot of the things that go into that, there's the gas tax. There are other revenue sources that feed the STF that are decreasing rapidly. So we need to be able to address that. This is one of those ways, and it is something that should certainly be addressed. There are multiple opportunities for us to start talking about what other ways we can, whether it is through EV infrastructure, whether it is through, all of our rail and buses are already subsidized, so those are not revenue sources. So we're going to have to start to be really creative. And this is in towns that are red and that are blue that are being affected. Our bridges, we always fall right in the middle. In the country, we fall in the middle of the pack in terms of crumbling bridges and infrastructure. We can't look away any longer, and we're the only state in the entire Northeast corridor that doesn't charge out of state vehicles. So
You anticipated the second part of my question, which is, as an owner of an electric vehicle, is the state providing any funding for charging stations?
So at this time, there is no funding available for this. This was something that was supposed to be, it was federally, it was supported, it was going to grow, and that was clawed back dramatically. And but that is certainly something that we are mindful of and very concerned about.
Can I make a comment? I just have a comment. I was an attorney in Bridgeport for 24 years, so your problem about election improprieties in Bridgeport will not be solved by throwing money at the problem. You're getting sandbagged by Ganem and his minions, so that's why it takes 6 years to litigate a election impropriety case.
Thank you. So just on your EV thing, last night, or 2 nights ago, I was coming up to Ridgefield. I'd driven up to Hartford, gone home, driven to Westport, come up to Ridgefield. I really needed to charge my car. It was getting a little dicey. And so I hit the thing to see where the chargers are. There is not a single charger above 95. And I limped my way home. Yeah. So it's a big problem.
Or they're not marked, like Stop and Shop might have some, but.
And they're not fast chargers, so that makes it really hard. There are no fast chargers on this side of the state. I too have an electric vehicle now. Can I just ask if there's anyone in line who has a question for me, because I will have to leave early? If you don't, then that's fine. But also, if anybody has a question for me, I think you all know how to get in touch with me. And I'm happy to answer those later.
Is there anyone who has something specifically for Senator Kushner?
I wanted to know if you're working at all on minimum wage for Connecticut.
The question was whether we're working on minimum wage for Connecticut.
Yes.
And when we passed the minimum wage increase in 2019, we indexed that so that every year the minimum wage has been increasing every year once we hit $15. We're now at $16.94. We're one of the highest in the country. we're not working on that because of the indexing that we currently have. I will say that one of my concerns has been about the tipped wage issue, because workers who are covered by where the employers are covered by the tip wage credit, we have not increased the minimum wage for those workers for an incredibly long time. So it's at $6.38. We uncoupled it in 2019. This was something I was extremely opposed to. It used to be linked to the minimum wage as a percentage of the minimum wage, so it went up every year. Now it doesn't, so it has been flat for a very long time. And I think that's a serious problem, but there is a very strong restaurant association lobby in Connecticut, and there are a lot of restaurant owners in the General Assembly, and unfortunately we've been unable to move that piece of it. But I think that's a problem.
Today it's 16.
No, it will go up next year. It goes up every January by the what's called the Employee Cost Index, which is a federal, that applies also to federal employees, where it's very similar to the Consumer Price Index that most people are familiar with. The reason we adopted the Employee Cost Index was because it was a little, they said it was smoother, that we wouldn't see fluctuations as much. But it has gone up every year, and we think it will continue.
Excuse me, my concern is that I do know of people, young people as well, who are being paid $12 and so on now.
Well, that
And
shouldn't
so how can that be addressed?
The only provision for young people is if they're under the age of 18 for 2 years. For the 16 and 17-year-olds, they can pay a training wage, which is 85% of the minimum wage, but they can only pay that for 90 days, and that's cumulative. If they're in 3 different jobs, it's the time they've worked in all 3 jobs, not starting over each time. If it's happening to anyone else, it is a violation. And with the exception of agricultural workers and tipped workers, I think those are the only real exceptions. Persons with disabilities, we have a bill now to establish a task force to begin to address concerns for the disability community and whether there should be a sub-minimum wage. But otherwise, it's illegal. And if you contact the Department of Labor, they have a very good wage and hours division.
Okay, sorry.
So, Julie, if you wanted to leave, because I know you have somewhere to go, thank you very much for coming today. We really appreciate it.
I love Ridgefield's League of Women Voters. You do a fantastic job, and I love the fact that people come out for these meetings every single time. So thank you for having me. And as I said, I'm always available if people have questions.
Thank you. I think there's some literature at the back as well from each of the representatives here. Thank you.
Hi. So Transgender Day of Visibility is the 31st of March, and our community is really under attack. And I guess I hear a lot about the SHIELD Act in Connecticut, but honestly, I don't think that that's going to be enough to protect our trans community members and enable them to have access to not only gender affirming care, but also to basic medical care. And in my lifetime, in the 70s, and I'm not sure about the 80s, but definitely the 70s, hospitals and places were literally refusing care for appendicitis and broken arms to trans individuals. And I'm not sure that the SHIELD Act is going to, because I keep hearing that thrown around, is going to be enough. And sorry, he's really loud. Sorry, sir. So anyway, there's a lot going on. And in a lot of states, they're making lists of transgender individuals. The federal government is threatening people. So we have ID protections here where people can have their correct gender marker on their ID, but the federal government is working to make that a felony where you go to jail, and you also have a huge fine for fraud, pretending you're someone you're not. So what is going to be done? Because I know they're using the Medicare, and I know some of our hospitals are already, I've heard from people who work in the hospitals, they're already reacting to this. They're already cutting back. And I know people who've recently had issues with some of our hospitals who happen to be trans. So what is and can be done, or are we just kind of like up a river without a paddle? Sorry.
I think you put it very politely.
Thank you for that, and thank you for all the advocacy that you do on behalf of the trans community. The short answer is, we're all members of the Reproductive Rights Caucus, and that caucus has embraced trans issues pretty aggressively, and that pattern is set for us by some of the organizations that we work with Planned Parenthood, with reproductive equity groups, and their stance and their ability to speak to us in a language that allows for us to truly understand what people are up against. They're really working hard to ensure that if it's a woman's issue, it's also a trans woman's issue, for example. And so this is the stuff that we are, many of us are within our individual caucuses, meaning in the Senate and in the House, many of us are with you on that and understanding how violent and aggressive the opposition is, and unnecessarily so. It makes absolutely no sense. It's a culture war against a very small number of people, meant to divide us and meant to make people afraid and meant to single out. And also it's an attack on women. If you tell a trans woman that they're not a woman, you've just eliminated you're cutting back on the number of women who exist in a voting block. It's all very intentional. We are constantly in any space hearing, if you say the word gender, for example, we're talking about government forms, driver's licenses. We have a bill on whether or not teens who are in driving classes can request a specific gender if it makes them more comfortable. Immediately, the opposition turns that into a transgender conversation. It has nothing to do with it, but the ability to flip that upside down and make it an angry conversation. Do you need a hug? It's vile and it's awful, and we're with you, and we will continue to fight, and we will continue to fight strongly.
Alyssa, I know that isn't actually the answer you're hoping for. I'll let the hug happen first. I know, Alyssa, I just want to say, we are advocating up there. I know how difficult this is. And when it comes up in public health, when it comes up in human services, we are all there with you. And I just want you to know that. Even though it's a really uphill battle right now with what's coming down from the federal government.
My name's Chuck Hancock. I live here in Ridgefield. First, I'd like to say thank you. This has been very informative. My question is about the possibility of a death with dignity law. We've tried it a number of times here in the state, never been able to get it done. And I don't know who to address this to, but I'm curious what's going on and what we can do from a community vantage point. I think if you poll the community, you would find that there is support for the concept. I don't know why we haven't been able to get it done, so I'm interested in your thoughts.
So I sit on judiciary and I fight for this bill all the time. We know that, 60-70% of Connecticut residents have said yes, they're 74, that they want this bill. I want this bill. I've been talking to leadership in the committee. The bill is not being called. It's not even being considered again this year. And I think it I got yelled at the last time I said it. I think it has to do with some of the leadership in the committee and some of leadership in the legislature. And so there is just a ceiling on this bill, despite the fact that we know that residents want it, and there are many advocates inside the committee. And I have spoken to leadership about the fact that many of the people who are advocating for this can't afford to wait.
what can we do from a community vantage point to bring pressure on the leadership?
I mean, that's the key. It's the pressure, right? So, just for clarity, in my 6 years up there, we've voted on it 3 times. We voted it out successfully out of public health, and then because of the way that the law is structured, it must then be referred to the Judiciary Committee, where it is either never called or some sort of sneaky kind of a law that exists that allows you to divide into Senate and House and all of that, and they kill the bill immediately. So it is always in the Judiciary Committee where it is killed. That is the only place I can suggest at this point to direct your focus, because that is the place where the bill just keeps dying. Thank you for advocating for that. It's a tremendous loss for us as a state.
Okay. Hi, my name's Al. I have a lot of friends who have children in parochial schools. So I want to talk about the homeschooling bill in pertaining to parochial schools. How does this bill, if it does, impact individuals, parents who want to take their kids out of the public school system and into the private school system or the parochial school system in terms of the process itself? Is there any change in the withdrawal process?
No.
And number, and quick.
Just ask your part 2, then I'll answer.
Part 2
Yep.
real quick.
Yep.
How does this bill also impact parents who are undocumented? Should they fear that now if they want to homeschool their kids, there is another, you have law enforcement or a government agency coming in and documenting you, and that might cause fear to those individuals. So, but your first one's really important.
So on part 1, I'll go back to what Aimee said regarding news sources, what comes out on social media. There was a lot of just kind of people's opinions as to what the bill was versus what it was affecting. If you look at our statute regarding equivalent education, it's the legal term for homeschooling. It's separate from parochial schools, from private schools, and from public education. There's 4 categories. And, I read the Catholic diocese testimony regarding the bill, and they believed it too when it doesn't. If you're withdrawing for other education, it's all accepted. But equivalent education is specifically when a parent is withdrawing to homeschool. And then what is our verification process that is happening? Again, for the parents who actually end up not educating their children, because, we have a very strong homeschool community here. I've met a few in Ridgefield and beyond. And it's unfortunate when a bill comes out and then so much, not misinformation, but there's just a lot of talk about it. So it does not affect. And on the second part of your question, I'm not sure. I haven't considered regarding if you're undocumented, what happens. So though, in the substitute language for the bill, I believe that, because I heard the DCF comments, it's parents, you hear the word DCF and you're like freeze, it strikes terror in your heart. And it's always very hard, when you're almost asked to prove a negative. And I believe the substitute language almost changed it to the school district would call DCF, because we have, FERPA, FOIA issues, there's that information kind of a stratification where the school would call DCF and ask, can you run this name? Do you have them in your files? They would enter the name, then they would say yes or no, and that's it. There's no printout at DCF, there's nothing. It's just the school registers, they were told yes or no, and then that's it.
Al, the bill from Judiciary Committee, SB 397, an act concerning democracy and government accountability. I am unsure if this addresses public schools and SDE, but I will take a look and see.
Thank you. Thank you for your hard work. I really didn't want to have to speak about this, but in Wilton, they have been horrible to renters. I don't know this discrimination that's going on in a lot of homeowners here, but it has to end. So I was just asking Wilton Representative, State Senator, Rocky Hill, for instance, they became involved with the Connecticut Attorney General to help residents, renters. And I was just wondering, I spoke with the Connecticut Attorney General's Office 2024, Sandra Arenas, and she tried to contact the slumlord, Avalon. They weren't fixing locks, and they became emboldened because Wilton didn't care. They didn't fix smoke detectors, for instance, 2 years. So we had no smoke detectors, locks not working. It was a horrible situation. So would you be willing to work with the the Attorney General's office to try to convince the First Selectman, the Board of Selectmen, to make sure that there's a building official who will check locks, have an ordinance similar to Bethel. We have our town administrator from Bethel. He was former First Selectman. He's very familiar for how it works. And in Bethel, the building official said they have no problem working with landlords and tenants to make sure locks work. If locks don't work, then, other problems start happening. Slumlords think they can get away with a whole lot. And I just also wanted to say, as a woman speaking to 3 women, to have a door lock work is everything to a rape victim, to a domestic violence victim, to get through from one day to the next. And to not have a lock, for years. It's been a horrible situation. And then, diagonally across from me was a town director. And that the First Selectman, working feet away from this town director, didn't care if she was killed or raped. It's disgusting. And, this woman was able to have a garage door close, but still, locks had to work. And my childhood was traumatized by murders and rapes in Wilton. And, 1995, Georgetown, 5 people were slaughtered because the criminal got up to the 2nd floor apartment, and I believe it was a broken lock, and got in, shot 5 men. Apologies to anyone if they knew them. And, ever since, Wilton should have made sure the one thing they could do is make sure locks work. Now, the First Selectman said our building official's too busy. We have someone who chases after blight, tall weeds, broken screens. And somehow in Bethel, they're able to find the time to contact the building official. Said to me, we meet with the landlords and the tenants. So I was just wondering, would you be able to go through the Connecticut Attorney General's office? Our First Selectman just could care less about protecting people. And then the second part of this is this town director is also ADA coordinator. She didn't care that our walkways and our driveways were blocked by parked cars, so handicapped people couldn't get out. So, and then they were also concealing documents, the grievance form, procedure, how to speak out, how to attend a meeting like this. She was concealing that. And it was on my shoulders to try to get those documents online. And as I told you, the public shaming seemed to work. I had to keep following up on that. So what I'm asking is, would you be able to try to see if there could be a committee, a commission? I believe there is in Ridgefield for the disabled, and that Ridgefield and Wilton have links from the first page, as in Westport, that links to these grievance forms, this procedure. So disabled can feel like they're not being discriminated against and full participation. And then the third part of it is Ridgefield successfully has a fair rent commission, and Wilton is going to drag their feet. Thank God for the state government that they have now mandated this for $15,000. But Wilton, I mean, you go through the minutes, they're just not really interested in doing that. And thousands of people, or hundreds of people were cheated on the rent. That's what the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Connecticut Attorney General, and other attorney generals agreed on, that Wilton had horrible landlords who cheated hundreds of people. And this one property on beyond Rings End, Route 7, a 5-year renter there, thousands of dollars owed. So will you put it in your
Sarah,
newsletter and
thank
your
you.
website?
Yeah, thank you. I know we've talked about these concerns before, and I was so glad to see that the Fair Rent Commission was put into the housing bill this past year. There is an implementation date. We can look into that to see what that date is, and hold the town to task on that.
It's like
And then just on your ADA, I'm actually a trained ADA coordinator. So that is a federal violation to not address. So anything that is not handled, you can report directly to the Department of Justice and should. That is the only recourse.
But it takes a long time.
It does, unfortunately. And the other unfortunate piece is this administration is not particularly interested in
I
defending
don't want this on my
the
shoulders
rights.
anymore. The town will has to have a commission, a committee for the disabled. It's gone on too long. They're at the pharmacy, the parking lot, town hall, at River Road, 25 River Road. These
Sarah,
so much discrimination.
thank you. Savet and I will talk with the first select person.
And the fire marshal.
We'll talk to them all.
Properties aren't
I
in
promise.
conformity.
Thank you.
One more person. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rosemary. I'm from Wilton. I'd like to address HB 5468. I have a couple of questions. Considering there's an increase in the amount of children being withdrawn, especially from the Black and Brown community, the way that it's currently written, and I just want to add, I do agree that that the children that have open cases with DCF, there should be some sort of follow-up or follow-through. So I'm not disagreeing with that part. But the way that it's currently written, do you think that it needs to be readdressed? I'm trying to look at these notes. Sorry, it's like kind of my to have everyone else come in for a yearly portfolio review. And would this action mean that there is a standing list of names for those who are homeschooled? Especially since other states that do have some type of regulation are not going by it this way. They actually are more welcoming to the homeschooling community and having them participate in their public schools. The way that it's being addressed, it is coming across as attacking the homeschooling community. And a lot of the people in the Black and Brown community do feel like it is a sort of hunting. So do you see that this bill will address that and will be changed when you bring it up to committee for review again?
Well, so two representatives voted against it from the Democrat side, Representative Trinae McGee and Antonio Felipe. They brought up some of the concerns from the Black and Brown community regarding the bill. But they did say, they wanted to work on it to address the issues. Regarding the yearly check, right now it's supposed to be every year verifying either in person in the school or online that you are continuing to homeschool your child. It's a once a year. On the either portfolio review, I think there's some talk about a test. I think that's still kind of open. Our schools districts actually don't want any more burden on themselves, regarding a portfolio review. Their suggestion is to have the State Department of Education have a system where parents could check in to take it off the plate of our school districts. And that's maybe a possibility, a portfolio review. It's really up to the parents. I mean, to me, it's almost, I would almost even look at some states who do have a yearly exam, or whether it's 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, whether it's like just for reading and math, just to make sure, more of a check also for the parents, that they are at the standards required for those grades. I think there can be a lot of discussion, and I really appreciate both your questions. And I've spoken to a few other people too, and there are plenty of homeschool families who've also told us that they do think that certain standards might be applicable from what they see in their community. So I think there's ways to check. And again, trying to say I think because there's a silo of information between DCF and the school might not know, or they might suspect but don't really say. So I think between SB 6 and the homeschool bill, maybe we can sort out the child safety side.
So I'm noticing it's now 11:30. Is it a quickie?
It's very quick. So
I'm very interested in environmental issues, and we have this big pot with lots of fingers in it, and the environment doesn't get its share. And I just wanted to make a pitch for loosening up some of the strings. We have some bills that require some oversight, some study groups, some money put in, and they're getting voted down, I understand, because nobody wants to put more money into them. So I would just make a pitch somewhere along the way. Ceci, you're retiring, that's terrible, but somewhere along the way for people to share Senator Maher's urgency about the environment and dip into that pot. I understand all the things you're doing are wonderful. I know you got lots of things to take care of, but please don't leave out the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you. That wasn't so much a question as a lovely statement. Thank you, everyone who came today. I really appreciate this opportunity for you all to meet your legislators, and I hope this format gave you more opportunity to ask more questions. I am going to do a plug for the League. Next Sunday, Votes for Women, suffrage since 1776. We have 2 professors from Sacred Heart University. You can register online with the library. This will be a wonderful program. Dr. Kelly Marino has a book that's coming out, I believe, soon. So if you'd like to register, please go to Ridgefield Library Marketplace. And if you want to learn more about the League, we have a QR code at the back there, or come to Queen Bee Coffee on April the 14th. We meet every second Tuesday of the month, and we just have general conversations. And we also have a banned book club. Anybody who's interested in literacy freedom, we meet only 3 times a year. We try not to give anybody too much homework. And I'm really pleased this year that it's as infrequent. It's April the 22nd, because the book for this quarter is the 1619 Project, and I have it sitting on my nightstand glaring at me. Yes. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you, senators and representatives.